Hey everybody, welcome to the Addiction Unlimited podcast, where you get to learn everything you want to know about addiction and recovery. I'm your host, Angela Pugh, co-founder of Kansas City Recovery, life coach, and recovering alcoholic. To learn more about me, you can listen to episode 0 on your podcast app or find us on the web at addictionunlimited.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the Addiction Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Angela Pugh. Today, I will answer a question I got from Nancy in Seattle, asking me about my experience in early sobriety and how I felt physically and emotionally. By the end of this episode, you'll really have a pretty powerful understanding of the different stages and what's going on inside of us as we navigate new sobriety, as well as how that comes out on the outside, because everything that happens on the inside comes out somehow on the outside. And I've written many articles on this same topic, and I include this in the training I do with my own staff. And I also wrote a curriculum to train treatment center staff. And I do a whole segment on early sobriety in that training as well. And I've done that in treatment centers nationwide. So this is incredibly important information, whether you are getting clean and sober yourself, or you have a friend or family member going through it, or have someone coming home from treatment. I know in my sober living houses, we are in consistent conversation about this because we have people in their first month of sobriety or anytime in their first year of sobriety, really. That's a perilous time for anyone. And there are a lot of symptoms that we have to be mindful of. And for you guys that are on the Addiction Unlimited email list, you will get some bonus information on this topic. And for those of you who want on that list, you can go to addictionunlimited.com, fill out the pop-up. It'll pop up pretty quickly. You can fill that in real quick, or you can leave me a voice message right on the homepage, click record, and leave me your name and email, and I am happy to add you to the list. So, what a lot of people don't realize is typically there are several months that things can be challenging when you first quit drinking or using drugs. It's like there's this misconception that once you go a week or so without drinking or using drugs, people think that we magically bounce back to who we were before we were addicted. And that's simply just not the case, right? There are a lot of changes that go on inside of us. Certainly once we reach a point of addiction, there are a lot of biological and physiological things that are happening that we're not aware of at all, but certainly that affect our behavior. When we're drinking and using drugs on a regular basis, and that doesn't mean every single day like me, right? But maybe that's just doing it regularly. Like you guys know if you're doing it regularly. But there's a lot of changes that take place, and your whole body chemistry shifts. Your organs have to overcompensate and work harder to break down the substances and keep you alive. They also have to adapt to whatever foreign substance we are adding, and they have to do whatever's necessary to try to keep your body in some sort of homeostasis, right? Which is that balance. And so your body and your brain are constantly kind of trying to figure out, okay, what's normal? What do I need to do? What am I doing too much of? What do I need to do more of? What do I need to produce to handle this situation? Not to mention your brain undergoes physical changes. Like drugs and alcohol literally change the chemistry of your brain. They physically change your brain. Your reward system is hijacked. Craving is created within your brain. And at that point, really, you're no longer in charge, right? Like you're in 12 steps, we talk about powerless. And this is some of the stuff to me that signifies powerlessness. Like, I am powerless as to whether or not I'm going to have craving, because a lot of that is in that chemistry of my brain and how it's changed in that process. To think all of this is going to change, like in 3 or 4 weeks of being substance free is just not realistic. And that's a lot of why I wanted to talk about this. The other reason I wanted to talk about it too is I see on Instagram a lot, you guys know I love Instagram, and I see on Instagram a lot people posting that are really newly sober. And I feel like sometimes people are a little sad about some of the things that they're going through or experiencing. And I always want to reach out and tell people like, it's okay, just keep getting through it. Like there's just a lot of things going on, a lot of changes inside of you, and just hang in there. And it does definitely get better. So I just wanted to kind of share my experience and some of the stuff that I went through. I got sober January 7th, 2006. So I've got a fantastic sobriety birthday coming up. And I was a chronic alcoholic. I mean, I drank a case of beer every day, probably half a bottle of tequila, and usually some other random shots mixed in there. Like it was insane, the amount that I drank every single day. And I'm a little tiny person too. I didn't eat food anymore. Like I was a hot mess. Like most people, I didn't decide to quit drinking easily. Like I didn't go easily into sobriety. It took, for me, it took a lot of pain. It took a lot of legal trouble, jail, physical deterioration. And if I'm honest, that stuff wasn't even enough, right? I did all of that and still kept drinking. But what finally made me quit was I crashed my car at 70 miles an hour on the freeway, and I hit another car. And literally in a split second, my entire life changed. I knew then that I had to quit drinking. Like I had known for a long time, for probably at least a few years, I knew that I needed to stop. And it's like I wanted to, but I really could not figure out how to do it. I couldn't figure out how to start stopping. And I know you guys have heard me say that before, but that's the truth. Like I couldn't even figure out kind of what was the first step to stop. And I know it probably sounds silly because you think, well, you stop drinking, you have a day you don't drink and you keep building on that. And logically, I guess that makes sense. But there's a lot that goes with that. When drinking is what you do all day, every day, and it's what your life revolves around. And I guess I shouldn't say all day, every day. Like I wasn't a morning drinker. When I would wake up, I would have several hours that I didn't drink. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. Like my throat was on fire. I was just not in any condition to eat or drink anything. But it's a lot to think about. Like, what would I do? How would my life be? Would I lose all my friends? Would I still be fun? Would I still be funny? When you're looking at all of those different aspects of your life and you feel clueless, it's hard to think how you're going to tackle all of that, And at that time, I didn't know that you don't tackle all of that, right? Like you just take the very next step. And that's one of the things I've learned in my sobriety. And this is one of the principles I coach a lot is just the very next step. That's all I have to do. If I think really big picture about stuff, I'm going to get overwhelmed. That's just human nature. And I have some fairly bad anxiety. So for me, that can be even more overwhelming. I have to just look at really what is the very next thing? What is the very next move I need to make? The very next step I need to take, and just do that. Don't think about all of the different aspects. So that's where I kind of had that paralysis for a long time, is that I just couldn't even figure out what to do next to start stopping, as weird as that sounds. The thing that changed for me was the thought that I could hurt someone else. And I had no problem hurting myself, right? Like I prayed for death every day because I just wanted the pain of living as a drunk to be over. I just wanted to stop feeling pain. And I had hurt myself, in different ways. I always called them drunk bumps. Falling down or whatever, things like that, simple things. But it never crossed my mind that I could hurt someone else. And I don't know if that sounds ridiculous or not. And maybe that's just how sort of self-absorbed I was. And maybe also I think because I literally drove drunk like every day of my life for many years. And when you do it so long successfully, it's hard to think that all of a sudden you're not going to do it successfully, right? Like maybe I built up in my head that I was good at it or something. I don't know. I don't remember having that conscious thought, but it just never dawned on me that I could hurt somebody else. And until I was standing on the side of the freeway, covered in blood, police lights everywhere, wondering if I had killed that guy that I hit. And I knew then that I had to stop. And I wanted to stop more than anything because I was exhausted. And I hated my life and I hated myself. And I felt so disgusting. And the person that I had become was revolting. It just was bad all the way around. But it took that extreme for me to really take it seriously and to really commit to doing it. That's what it's about. I don't think it's that any of us don't want to quit. Like, I think most of us understand that we're in pain. Most of us understand that our lives are not the way we would like for them to be, right? Like when I do an intervention, that's one of the things I always say. It's like, well, even if you don't think you're addicted, I think we can agree you're not living your dream life, right? Like this isn't what you want it to look like as we're sitting in some gross motel room that is destroyed and drug paraphernalia everywhere and garbage. And, like obviously that's not our best life. And even though I lived in a nice place, there were times that it wasn't much nicer than what I just described. So I think we can all agree on that piece that we're not living the way that we want to and we don't feel as good as we would like to. I think most of us, we just don't know the next step to take to start stopping, like I said. So my first 30 days, I couldn't go to AA right away. Many of you know I am a 12-stepper. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I like to say, too, I am not a spokesperson for Alcoholics Anonymous. That is not my thing. To speak on behalf of AA is not my thing at all. All I can do is share my experience and what happened for me and how I did it and how it worked for me. So I couldn't go immediately because I had sustained injuries from my accident. And to punish myself, I made the decision when I left the hospital, after my accident, I left the hospital to go home. I made the decision to not get the prescription pain meds filled, don't get my prescription filled because I wanted to suffer. I mean, that's really it. I wanted to punish myself. And I told myself that I deserved to suffer and I deserved to be in pain. And that's what I did. I went home and my face was busted up. It was a really challenging time. It was horrible. I detoxed and lived in that pain, and that was that, right? So I was 7 days sober when I went to my first meeting, and I went to a couple of different groups before I found one where I felt comfortable, and that's actually still my home group to this day. We call it your home group if that's where you go all the time, and that's where you know people and people know you. That's your home group. And I went every single day. And what I noticed at first was like everything felt a bit fuzzy. I felt like I was in slow motion a little bit and I couldn't remember anything to save my life, right? My short-term memory was shot. And now I understand that's a brain thing and that's one of the processes that is all effed up when you drink every day, right? Like obviously your brain is not on top of its game and storing memories. But those were kind of the first things that I noticed. I just felt fuzzy. My memory wasn't great. Outside of that, I think my first few weeks, I was so grateful to quit drinking. I felt great and I was super excited to be in AA and I looked forward to going every day. I had a lot of respect for the people that I was meeting in those rooms and for their achievement of sobriety. And I wanted to have the same achievement and I wanted to show them that I could do it too, right? So I settled in fairly quickly and I felt really proud to be a part of this exclusive club where people were working super hard to get better. And that just isn't something that you find very often in the regular world, right? Most people talk about making changes or talk about doing better, but they don't actually do it. But in AA, I was surrounded by people every single day who were completely committed to becoming better people. They were doing it and not just talking about it. And that was thrilling to me. At the same time, my body and my brain were going through a lot of stuff. All of those toxins from years of drinking, all those toxins have to come out of your body. And I say this to my clients all the time, like, remember, every organ inside of you has to detox. And that's not going to happen quickly, right? Like, I'm not a doctor. I can't tell you what all that stuff is doing in there or how it detoxes itself. I just know that I drowned my body for more than a decade in drinking every single day. Probably 13, 14 years I drank every single day. I know that my organs had their own trauma to deal with, right? Maybe they were in there getting therapy, who knows? So I just knew that every organ had to detox and it had to recalibrate. And in that process, some weird things kind of started happening, right? Like I had physical things. Everything was feeling fuzzy. That was one of the things I was talking about. I may have seemed a little clueless, really, but it just took a minute for things to sink in. And sleep was a huge problem. Many people with addiction talk about having issues with sleep. This is really common. And I think, our minds move so quickly and the chatter in our heads is so overwhelming. You can't make it stop long enough to relax and go to sleep. And I still, to this day, I've always had sleep problems. Even before I drank, I had sleep issues. And to this day, I still have to fall asleep listening to something most of the time, 98% of the time. I'll either listen to an audiobook and I'll just set the sleep timer so it'll shut itself off, or I have a ton of motivational and inspirational videos that I listen to on YouTube. So maybe I'll start one of those. I'll find one that's a little bit longer and I'll start it. Or maybe a guided meditation, anything to distract me from the chatter of the committee in my head. That's what I call it, the committee, because it's just constantly going and discussing things and it makes me crazy. It works overtime. So sleep was a problem. And still, like I said, I just go to sleep listening to something. It distracts me from all the stuff in my head, and that works for me. The other thing that was strange for me early on is I got cystic acne. And this was a really weird experience for me. I had never had bad acne, like even as a young person. As an adolescent, I think really is when you're supposed to experience stuff like that. Like I had the occasional blemish here and there, but nothing unmanageable. And all of a sudden, I had these huge menacing cysts on my back and shoulders. And I think I had that for probably my whole first year. And I tried different medicated soaps and creams and all that kind of stuff. I don't really think anything helped. Like I remember my skin being really dry because, of course, anything for acne is just drying, right? That's all it does is dry you out. And I remember going through that, but I don't know if it actually helped the cystic acne or not. And of course, to a certain extent, like I felt really gross and, I just made sure I wore shirts that covered everything. It's not like anybody else knew, but it was just a strange thing to experience. And again, to me, I think that was just all the toxins coming out. Everything has to come out. That's all my organs and my body just pushing out all of that stuff. The next thing that comes to mind was when I was about 4 months into my sobriety. And in AA, we use the phrase irritable, restless, and discontent. And that really sums it up. Like you can use that phrase in all of your life for everything. I'm always, when I catch myself being snippy or snappy or just short-tempered or impatient, I always do. I'm like, oh, irritable, restless, and discontent. Yeah, I'm 2 out of 3, or maybe I'm all 3, whatever. They say in life it takes about 4 to 6 months for the newness of something to wear off, whether that's a job or a new relationship or new sobriety, right? Somewhere around that 4 to 6 month range is when the new high wears off and you start to look at little things that don't make you happy, right? Small details start to feel like big annoyances. And that is exactly where I landed around 4 months sober. I was just feeling restless and I still loved AA, but I started noticing like most people in there were older than me and I wanted to hang out with people that were in a similar life stage. which is an interesting statement too, because I was 33 when I got sober. And I was incredibly immature, even for 33. So I think I wanted to hang out with people in a similar life stage, but I'm like, well, who would that have been? Because it wouldn't have been a regular person at 33, because really emotionally and mentally, I was probably about 18 or 19. And that might be giving me a little bit of credit, but I just started noticing that stuff, and I started having thoughts like, is this it? Is this all I'm going to do the rest of my life? I'm just going to go to work and go to meetings. There was no way I was going to stop going to meetings because I wanted to be sober more than anything. And I knew my group was my support, and my group was showing me the way. And I knew I had a lot of work to do too, and that helps. But I did feel like I was getting so much better every day. So I never thought I didn't want to go to meetings anymore. I was just bored, right? Like I was just sitting around thinking, okay, is this really it? Then my anxiety started to kick in. And here we go back to irritable, restless, and discontent. I spent so many years of my life dependent on alcohol to take away my anxiety. And that left me unable to cope with my anxiety on my own. And once the newness of my sobriety wore off, my anxiety promptly moved in and got comfortable. And there were times that I would sit in a meeting and I would play solitaire on my phone just to distract myself from the overwhelming anxiety that was like telling me to leave. Like that was the only way I could get myself to sit still and stay for the meeting. Because there were times I would go in and I have the same seat. I always sit in the same seat for a million years. I have my spot, right? And that's where I like to be. As soon as I walk in the door, that's where I go. And like I would walk in the room and I would sit in my seat. And it's like as soon as I would sit down and be still, all this anxiety would start kicking in. And I would start having these thoughts, right? The committee in my head would start going like, this feels weird. None of your really good friends are here. Maybe you shouldn't stay. Maybe you can go, just go have lunch or, like whatever. The committee would just start telling me to leave. And I didn't want to leave, and I knew it wasn't the right thing to do to leave. So I would just play solitaire on my phone. And that would keep me in the seat. There were also times that I would walk into my group, and if somebody was sitting in my favorite seat, I literally would turn around and leave. Just because it was more than my little fragile self could handle, I guess. Like I needed the regularity of my comfort and my safety spot, and I needed everything to be in order or my anxiety would just take over. And I got pretty lucky actually, because toward the end of my first year, like some other sort of younger people, I think they were all actually quite a bit younger than me, but they came into my group and we all became friends, and it really was life-changing. And you guys have heard me talk about that on other episodes, that I had this crew of people, we had this group and we did everything together. And I think I was about 9 months sober when my group of friends came together, and I felt like I finally had a tribe. We did everything together. It was brilliant. Usually anyway, sobriety kind of shifts when you enter your second year, because your first year is a lot of damage control and a lot of just getting comfortable, right? I have to figure out a new routine and a new normal, as they say, and I have to just really get stable and secure in being a sober person. And for me, I had a lot of legal trouble, right? So I was dealing with court and my trial and all of these things, probation and urine tests and all of this stuff. Like it was just a lot my first year. I just had to get through some of those initial things. In my second year, if you have truly taken care of yourself and strengthened your sobriety, then you're getting much more comfortable and secure. And you're also growing up and feeling more confident overall. And many of those biological things on the inside of us that I was talking about, your organs detoxing and recalibrating and rebooting, and your brain has to detox and reboot. And all of those things have started to rest a little bit too. I'm not going to make this like a huge science lesson because you guys know I'm obsessed with the brain and the neuroscience of addiction and behavior, but I don't want to turn this into a snooze fest, so we'll keep it simple. But there are definitely some stages to keep in mind your first year of sobriety. And we have withdrawal syndrome. Or withdrawal symptoms. This is where you hear about people going to detox. Before they go to treatment, they go to detox. And these are the acute symptoms, the immediate effects of withdrawal right when you stop drinking or using drugs. Usually it's 5 to 7 days. Like for me, I just laid around at home. I didn't know it was incredibly dangerous. I had no idea, but I just did it at home and felt like crap. And that's something to point out too. Everybody should be really aware that alcohol is one of the most dangerous drugs to withdraw from. And it can cost you your life. And the same goes for anti-anxiety meds, which are benzodiazepines like Xanax and Klonopin. It's super important to do these withdrawals with medical supervision. At least seek medical attention in the beginning, right? Go to an emergency room, go to a detox unit, let them check you out physically, check your vitals, make sure you're stable. It's just really important with those two things, alcohol and benzodiazepines, really important. The next stage is really what I've been talking about a lot. After you get through that initial 5 to 7 days, then you're going into what we call post-acute withdrawal. And this is the thing that I feel like I see a lot of on Instagram with people just talking about, in their first 60 or 90 days for sure. But anytime really in that first year, some of the things they're experiencing, I always think, it's post-acute withdrawal or PAWS, 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 post-acute withdrawal syndrome. And post-acute is after the acute, right? And these are symptoms that can last months, up to a year or more. Like I've read some things that say up to 2 years you can have post-acute withdrawal. And again, it's just the process of your brain and your body expelling all the toxins, all of your organs detoxing and cleaning themselves out, and everything figuring out what is normal now and how they're supposed to function. And one of the key pieces, I think, too, with post-acute withdrawal, and it's crazy that more people aren't familiar with this word, especially anybody that has any involvement in addiction in any way, is something called anhedonia. Anhedonia is the inability to feel pleasure. So when we drink and use drugs, we mess up the chemistry in our brain, right? And we mess up its process of releasing certain things like dopamine and serotonin, endorphins. There's a whole bunch of these neurotransmitters that we have that are our natural feel-good things, right? And these are all the things that make you feel pleasure, contentment, joy, happiness, relaxation. And when we're using drugs and drinking, we deplete all of our reserves. So when we stop using, our brains don't have any of those natural feel-good things left to release. And that leaves us with zero ability to feel good, right? Because you don't have any feel-good stuff. One of the main symptoms of post-acute withdrawal is depression. And this is why a lot of people struggle, I think, to stay sober in the beginning because they feel like crap. And feeling like crap is only sustainable for so long. And once people feel so crappy, if they don't feel like they have any solution, then they think their solution is going back to drinking and or using drugs. And all of these things, too, are different for every person. Like, remember that every single person, our body chemistry is different, and different drugs cause different effects. So every single person will not have the exact same experiences. I'm not sure, really, if I ever went through anhedonia myself because, well, maybe, I guess, in that first week, right, when I was laying in bed and I was all broken and miserable, like maybe I had anhedonia then, because I was detoxing, right? But after that, I think I was so excited at the prospect of a new life that really I just jumped into healing with both feet. I was all in. And a good way to think about this is acute withdrawal or detox occurs immediately when you stop using. And it's primarily the physical symptoms, right? Feeling sick, tired, nauseous, or throwing up. And your body is achy. I always say, think of it like having the flu. Maybe you have a headache. Like I felt like I had the flu for almost 4 days. Like I just had the flu. My whole body was just achy and cold sweats, hot sweats. Like it was awful. And that's when the bulk of your substance really is leaving your body. And post-acute is more about the psychological and emotional symptoms that come next. So it's a bit of a roller coaster ride. Symptoms don't happen in any order. Some people have all of them, some have very few, and they just come and go. I think the important thing to remember is that they go. Like, don't think that any of these things are going to sit in and stay around forever. So I want to read really quickly just a list of symptoms, and I think they'll make sense. Anybody that has been through this stuff will definitely make sense. So trouble concentrating, difficulty with memory, anxiety, fear, or panic, irritability, fatigue, trouble sleeping, anhedonia, and mood swings. I wanted to talk about this topic for 2 reasons. One, for those who are dealing with an addicted person in their first year, it's really great to know that some of this stuff really is beyond their control. And if somebody's being a jerk, just know that they're not doing it on purpose. Try to be patient. Definitely set healthy and strong boundaries. That's important no matter what. And remember that there's a lot going on inside of that person that is completely beyond their control. And the second reason is for those who are themselves in their first year and may be feeling like they're losing their mind. Again, there's a lot of biology taking place inside of you. And I want everybody to always challenge yourself to try hard and do well. Always challenge yourself, but also give yourself a bit of a break when you feel out of whack, because you're going to feel that stuff. And there's just a lot of adjusting going on. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. I love talking about this stuff. And again, for those of you on the Addiction Unlimited email list, you're going to get some bonus information on this topic. And if you want to get on that list, go to addictionunlimited.com and you can fill out the thing there, or you can leave me a voice message right on the homepage. Click record, leave me your name and your email, and I will happily add you to the list. I hope you guys are having a fantastic Christmas. Thanks so much for spending a little bit of time with me. We'll see you next week.
You've reached the end of another great episode of the Addiction Unlimited podcast. Candid and honest conversation about addiction and recovery. Be sure to visit us at addictionunlimited.com to join the conversation and access show notes and links to everything we talked about. Love this episode? Please take 30 seconds to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes to help us improve and give you the information you want. Thanks for listening. See you next week.